With all the awesome new features coming to Unity's dots and ECS, you may be considering making a game of your own using them. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the different types of games that work best with Unity's data-oriented technology stack and their entity component system. And if you are interested in developing with dots and ECS, then I'd like to invite you to join our Discord community. It's just a real great place where you can go to hang out with other ECS developers, and you can ask any questions that you may run into along the way, and of course share different little tidbits that you find as you're developing with dots and ECS. And if you're still pretty new to dots and ECS and you don't really understand what it's all about quite yet, definitely go check out this playlist right here. It's going to help you get up to speed with all the different terminologies and then show you how to get started with actually developing using dots and ECS. If you do think I missed anything, be sure to let me know what you think the perfect types of games to be developed on the entity component system are down in the comment section right below those like and subscribe buttons. Alright, so now let's talk about some of the different types of games you can make with ECS. So to start things off, I just want to be clear and say that if you're making a game with ECS, not everything in your game has to be controlled by the entity component system. There's still plenty of things that you, well, first of all, can't do in ECS quite yet, but beyond that, there's still some more things that just make more sense to do in object-oriented programming, and it's probably always going to be that way. So ECS and object-oriented programming, they can still work side by side and complement each other. So I like to think of ECS as just another tool in the tool belt for you as a game developer. So that being said, I think it's a better idea to instead think about what types of games you can make with ECS. You want to think about what types of systems are best suited to be developed in ECS. And then once you have those core systems, then you can start to look at what games make the most sense to take advantage of those different mechanics. So now if you're familiar with the entity component system, then you probably already know that the one that everyone pretty much always talks about is how many entities you can have on screen, or even how many entities you can have off screen that are still being simulated. Because of how all the entities and their associated components are all neatly arranged in the system memory, makes it much easier for the systems and thus the computer to operate on many more of these entities than we could with traditional mono-behavior programming. So naturally, I think everyone's mind kind of goes to space shooter type games where you can have thousands of different enemies moving all on the screen and firing lasers completely independently, but all interacting with each other. One of the things that Unity mentioned in one of their tutorial videos that they put up about ECS is you could literally have like a real-time space battle happening essentially in the background of the main action of your game, but it could still be kind of interacting with things that are happening. So if you maybe shot some ship and it made some big explosion, you could have all the things that are kind of like more or less in the background all react to that explosion, and this is all dynamically happening in real time. It's not like a video being played, and it's not being like faked in any kind of way, but it's more than just the ships and the enemies on the screen. You can really have like a whole asteroid field and different planets and moons all being simulated by some type of gravity system. Again, everything's all interacting with each other and affecting each other. And so this sounds cool and all, but I know that some people are thinking, kind of what's the point? Why do you need so many thousands and thousands of enemies on the screen and all these like crazy physics interactions happening? Well, it really just kind of like gives your player a much better experience. It makes them more immersed in the world. It makes the world feel more alive so that, the people are kind of connecting with your game more. And this is something that we previously couldn't really do as much just because, we're pretty much at the limits of the computing power. With ECS, we're changing things on the software side to unlock more power out of our hardware. And today's video is brought to you by DownloadMoreRAM.com. But beyond space shooters, really this applies to any type of open world type game where you want the world to really feel alive more than just, kind of a regular game. And there was a person in our Discord community who was talking about how he was making a game that essentially like simulated an ecology. So you'd have, all sorts of plants and animals that are growing and living and dying and doing their own thing, and they all kind of like influence each other. Now you go in and you throw the player interactions in there, and then the player really feels like they have like an impact on the world. Now, kind of circling back to having a bunch of entities on screen, I think horde games lend themselves really well to be used with the entity component system. One example I can think of that not necessarily was made with the entity component system, but is Days Gone. This is the PlayStation exclusive zombie game from Sony Bend Studio. And one of the coolest parts about that game is these different horde battles where there was like, hundreds of zombies that were essentially chasing you, yet each one of them thinks independently. So it kind of turns into a bit of a puzzle where you, as one person with limited tools and resources at your disposal, have to figure out how you want to take out each of these enemies, either one by one or just, small little groups at a time until you've completely wiped out the herd. And so sort of similar to that would be real-time strategy games. Basically anything with a lot of potential enemies that are each making their own kind of real-time decisions based off of things in the world. All right, so now let's move away from games where you have a lot of entities on the screen to talking about games where you're simulating one very big and complex entity. So in this kind of case, I'm referring to basically dynamic terrain generation. Now, making kind of random and dynamic terrain is something that really interests me with ECS and is something that I want to experiment with more. I think it'd be pretty cool to just, have some crazy complex dynamically generated terrain and maybe even making a voxel world about it so you can make it, essentially all completely destructible. And again, this just makes the player feel like they have much more of an impact on their world because they can, shoot a rocket and it destroys, like takes a big chunk out of a mountain kind of thing. That's never not fun. So next up would be multiplayer games. Now this is still kind of like an in theory or on paper one because Unity's Dots multiplayer platform is still in development. But Unity seems pretty bullish on their Dots multiplayer suite, and what they've talked about so far, they seem pretty excited about it. Now, I haven't really messed around with it at all myself because, of course, I don't have access to any of that, but to me, it just makes sense that the performance benefits from Dots can lead to a reduction in latency and, of course, more accurate representations of what's happening in the game on the client side. And, of course, this is going to mean that we're going to be able to have, bigger worlds with more players in them. Think Battle Royale games because this world desperately needs more Battle Royale games. I'm only kidding, of course. There's one Battle Royale game that matters, and that is Tetris 99. But seriously though, what if you combine like a Battle Royale game with some crazy dynamically generated voxel world with completely destructible environments? I think that's a recipe for a great game. You can take my idea on that and pay me $1 million. Alright, so moving on. Now, Dots isn't always necessarily about bigger and better and more and this and that, but it's also about less. Because of the performance benefits of Dots, we can smoothly run games on lower powered devices that don't feel watered down or stripped of certain features. So I don't know if you've heard of Project Tiny, but it essentially runs on a Dots runtime. But Project Tiny is for mobile and WebGL, and it greatly reduces the file size of your games and hardware resources consumed. So it's going to increase the ease of access to your game because people with lower powered phones and poor internet connection can more easily play your game. So it naturally increases your player base, which is really a great thing. Also, it's going to lead to a better player experience because people's phones aren't going to be overheating or draining battery constantly as they're just trying to play your game. So I'm really excited about the potential that Project Tiny has. Now, the last one that I'm going to talk about is something that I really don't have much experience with, but again, it just really makes sense to me that something like this would work very well. Of course, I'm talking about artificial intelligence. So I know Unity is starting to roll out some artificial intelligence and machine learning type features into the game engine. So again, it kind of just makes a lot of sense to me that you can have more ML agents doing things to actually train your AI system much faster. So I think it'd be pretty cool if you made a game using the entity component system and you had some kind of like learning AI that learns as the player plays the game, and it actually can kind of like scale the difficulty based on skill rather than just kind of like, increasing damage stats. And then I think that could make a really compelling game. So anyways, those are the types of games that I think lend themselves best to be developed with the entity component system. Again, I think you should be kind of looking at this from a systems perspective. So, what are the types of systems that, really work well with ECS? And then from there, you can kind of figure out what types of games that you want to make. Anyways, if you think I missed some specific type of game, like you think, oh, this would work perfect with the entity component system, again, let me know down in the comment section below. And hey, while you're there, make sure you hit that like button and feel free to subscribe to the channel for lots more videos on new features coming to the Unity game engine. Of course, don't forget to join our Discord community where you can go hang out with other ECS developers and just kind of share knowledge as you develop. So anyways, I'm going to wrap up today's video. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one.